Thank you all so much for joining us. And I'm going to go through the body condition scoring system and why that's important for our cow herd and some ways that we can utilize it in our management. So what is a body condition score? When we really get down to it, it's a numerical assessment of the relative fatness or body condition or body composition of our animals. And so it was designed to be an objective way to assess the fatness of our cow herd. We know that as animals have more fat, they are able to have greater energy reserves to draw down on when they need that at times when their energy demand might be greater. And so the system was set up to be objective so that we could find a way to track this in our cow herds. And so the US beef system uses whole numbers ranging from 1 to 9. So you will hear sometimes people throw out that, oh, she's a 4.5 or a 5, but technically they are whole number systems. And so right there in the middle of that 1 to 9 is where we're going to consider an ideal body condition score being 5 to 6. And just for reference, 1 is going to be extremely emaciated and undernourished, whereas 9 is going to be pretty extremely obese. And so this is truly a measure that's related to, again, the nutritional status of the animal or the herd. And what that allows us to do is get an idea of where our herd is at without having to, say, get them up and weigh them. That's not practical. And really in a cow herd, that doesn't always tell us a whole lot. So if we think about a cow in her last third of gestation, if we were to go put her on a scale every single day for that last third, she should be gaining weight, although she may not be gaining body condition. Now, if we were to take that same cow and put her on the scale every day, and we got the same exact number every single day we weighed her during that last third of gestation, then we would be saying, okay, she's got to be losing some condition somewhere because at that time, that calf is growing. So that should be adding weight, but her weight's staying the same. So it's kind of, like I said, it's an easier way to kind of assess where the cow herd is at than getting them up and weighing them every day. So how do we assess body condition score? So this diagram here shows some different places to look when we're trying to evaluate the body condition of our cows. So the first place that we can look is up there at the front in the brisket. Now this is a cow that's got some Brangus influence to her, but that doesn't explain everything that's going on up front in this cow. She is a little on the heavy side. So even though we would expect her to have a little extra skin there, she doesn't get to use the extra skin excuse for everything. The other places that we can look is going down their top of their back. What we're looking for there is the spinal process, which is that bone that sticks up. We're looking to see, can we see that bone? Other places to look are going to be over the ribs. We want to look and see, do we see ribs when we look at this animal? If so, if we can see ribs, how many can we see? Other places to look are going to be over the hooks and the pins, and then looking at that tail head, looking to see if she's got some accumulated fat there. So again, this girl does have a little extra condition on her, but I'm just pointing out some of those places to evaluate and to look for the fat to determine what the actual body condition score of the animal is. So I mentioned that this was designed to be an objective measure, although it is pretty subjective. If you were to send myself and Dr. Limcooler and Dr. Anderson all out into a field full of cows and tell us to each go over and body condition score each one of them, I guarantee when we came back and compared notes, we would have some different answers. And so I like this table because it does help kind of make it a little more objective. Now, I mentioned that we want to keep body condition score around that 5 to 6 point. And so that's why I put that red line between body condition score 4 and 5. And so if we're looking through each of those places that we just talked about and asking ourselves the questions, okay, can I see the outline of that spine? Are those spinal processes visible? If the answer is no, then she falls above that red line. She falls into that 5 or 6 or plus category. And so you can look down through there, and it's kind of a pretty natural breaking point for a lot of the things that we're looking for. Muscle atrophy is one I didn't touch on, but that's looking at whether or not muscle tone is kind of concaved versus being a convex shape, have some bloom to it. So again, when they get down below that body condition score 5, we start to see some muscle atrophy, and you'll actually see a concave shape to their muscle tone. And I've got a picture here in a minute that I'll show that to you. So I want to walk through some pictures here. And so I've got a picture of a cow here, and it's not the best picture, but I think you can see enough to get the gist of where she's at. And so if we walk through some of those questions from that table, is the outline of her spine visible? And if we're looking down the top here, we can see the outline of her spine in this photo. So the answer to that would be yes. Is there much muscle atrophy? When you look at the hind end of this cow, yeah, there is some concaveness to her muscle tone versus that convex shape that we like to typically see in the musculature of our animals. So yes to that question as well. Can we see the outline of her ribs? You can start to see that even in this photo. In person, you can definitely see that. So the answer to that one is being yes, and we can see the outline of her hips. So if we go back to our table here and we look at how we answered those questions, we can see that she falls below that body condition score 5 based on how we answered all those questions. And so I'm going to put her closer to a 3. She's pretty thin in that photo there. Now, of course, photos can be deceiving. And so it's good to, when you're actually looking at your cattle, to look at them from different angles and that sort of thing. But based on that photo there of that cow, I'm going to call her a 3. So I've got another cow here who's has got a little more conditioner on her, certainly, than that last cow. So if we walk through some of those same questions, is her spine visible? No, it's not like that last cow was. Is there muscle atrophy? Look at her hind end there. We've got much more of that convex shape than we saw in that last cow. Is the outline of her ribs visible? Slightly. If we get back here, yeah, I can probably count a couple of ribs, but we certainly aren't seeing all of them. Are the outlines of her hips visible? Yeah, we can see a little bit, but certainly it wasn't like that last cow. And then fat in the brisket. This cow doesn't have that Bos indicus influence in it as that other cow that I showed you. And so when you start to look up here, yeah, she might have a little bit of fat in there. And so if you walk through those questions based on how we answered them, we see that this cow kind of falls above that threshold between 4 and 5, certainly. So we're going to say that she's going to be at least adequate there. I'm going to call her more of a 6 and put her right in that 6 column. Now, looking at the extreme end here. This cow does have a bit of a backstory. She lost her calf pretty early on and then was running with her herd mates who were all eating a diet formulated for cows in lactation, and she certainly was not. And so you can see here that we don't see the outline of her spine. We certainly aren't able to see any ribs on her. Yes, there absolutely is fat in her brisket and back here in her flanks. Can we really see the outline of her hips? No. And so as we move through and ask some of those questions about this animal, we find that absolutely, without a doubt, she's above the 5 or 6 range. That's without a doubt. I'm going to put her as an 8, what I'm calling an 8+, and that's being pretty kind. She was a pretty fat cow in that photograph there, in pretty much any photograph of her at that time. So why is body condition score important? This is some pretty classic data. It's been repeated in multiple studies. And so I drew that red line on that table between 4 and 5, and I should have another red line here. So if we look, each of these bars represents a body condition score of cows at calving. And then if we look at their subsequent pregnancy rates after a 90-day breeding season, we see that when they get down in this body condition score 4, pregnancy rates dramatically drop off, and we get down in this 50% range. And so if the average of the herd is a body condition score 4, and your average, you're getting that 50% pregnancy rate, it's going to be hard to quite frankly be profitable when that's what you've got going on. And so that is why it is so critically important that we keep these cows up here in this 5 and 6 range. And you see up here that you got a slight advantage in the 6, but certainly we see this dramatic drop between 4 and 5. So this is some other data that's looking at the same thing, but taking it a little bit more extreme by throwing in the cow body condition score of 3. So again, we see that pretty dramatic drop off in pregnancy rate between a body condition score 4 and 5. The other thing that you see here is this increased length of calving interval. And what's so critical about this is you'll notice if you go from 5 to 4, we go from 364 days, right at a calendar year, to over a calendar year. And so now we've got cows that are not producing a calf for us each year. And we are really losing some productivity there. Because of that longer calving interval, the next year when we go to wean those calves would be younger. They end up being lighter. And so we kind of get this double whammy of lighter calves, and if we're not careful, we end up losing the efficiency there because they aren't having a calf each year. So there's not as much information about what happens when they get well above a 6. And I really should have put that above a body condition score 7, because we do routinely see cows that come up in that 7 range. But when they get to be like this girl in this photograph here that we've already talked about, there was some older data that suggests a potential for decreased birth weight and milk production. But again, that is some older data. There was some calving difficulty observed in both those studies, but the caveat there is that was when those were obese heifers. When they took those same animals and had them as cows, they didn't see that calving difficulty there. Probably what we're more sure of, though, is that it's going to cost a lot of money to feed a whole herd of cows looking like she does. So that is one of the real drivers behind not wanting to have our cows looking like that. Not only the feed costs to keep them there, there's also going to be some issues with those animals carrying around that extra weight. You might see some issues with feet and leg issues, lameness issues as well when they start to get that big. So when is the best time to body condition score the cow herd? My short answer for this is often. When you're driving around looking at your cattle, you're out there looking at them, chances are you are taking a look at and maybe indirectly assessing body condition score. But in terms of actually, taking that data, writing it down and keeping it as part of your records, certainly we want to do that at calving. We kind of want to know that's kind of when her new year starts. So we want to know where she's at. We want to see where she's at breeding, because that can, because we can make sure that she hasn't lost condition to that point. Again, we want to check this. I wrote pre-weaning. I was kind of vague there, but pre-weaning, we want to look at that because if we're in a situation where we have got drought going on or something like that, and we've got some really thin cows and it's 45 or 60 days before we're traditionally going to wean, there are some management things that we can look at doing at that time, and we're going to talk about those later. Certainly, we want to look at weaning. At weaning, that's when her energy demands, the cow's energy demands, are going to go down dramatically, and so that is our opportunity to really focus on regaining some body condition if we've got some cows that are at that body condition score 4 at that point. About 45 days post weaning. So again, if we've got cows that we've been managing and trying to put some condition back on, that's a good point to look and see how we're doing with that. And then 90 days before calving, because this is really the last window that we have during while she's pregnant, to be able to put on some extra condition before she calves, because those energy demands dramatically increase when they go from gestating to lactating. And so that last 90-day period is kind of another good point to check in and say, yep, everything's good, or no, I need to make some adjustments. Some places to start. If you haven't been recording body condition score or making management decisions based on body condition score, it's easy to start with just sorting the cows into groups that are thin, moderate, or fat. As I mentioned, if you sent all of us out in the field to record body condition score, we might come up with some different answers. But in general, if you'd asked us to go out and say, is this one thin, is this one fat, or is this one kind of in the middle, that's a little bit easier. We probably will come back with some more uniform results on that. It's good to actually write this down to be able to track this over time, be able to track it year over year in your herd. Are there places where we are giving up performance potentially because year over year, we see that we've got a bunch of cows at this specific time that are losing body condition score. Maybe we need to look at doing something a little different. I put on here to take photos or videos to visualize the differences. This is a tool that we didn't always have. We all have a photo and video camera in our pocket pretty much at any given time. And so that's another way to be able to go out and get a look at a particular animal, come back later on and look at her again and be able to really compare, did she put on condition or did she not? So managing the cow herd based on body condition score, what can we do? Well, one of the best things we can do is sort cattle by body condition score. I mentioned that I didn't do that with that cow in that photo, and that's because she's on a research herd, and so sometimes we don't get to do all the things that we'd like for producers to do in a traditional setting. She had to stay in that group. But if I was managing this herd not as a research herd, by all means, I would have pulled her out of that group probably well before she got to the way she was looking. The adequate cattle, that means that things are going pretty good there, and we probably don't need to change a whole lot. If we've got a bunch of fat cattle, then we need to look at moving them to something that's got less nutrient or energy dense diets. So if we have got cattle out on pasture and we've got some pastures that are better than others, then that would be a good place to put those cattle that don't quite need the extra nutrition on a poorer pasture, looking, potentially at some lower quality hay as well. Again, we don't need to be putting extra resources into cattle that are already over conditioned. But the real area that we need to focus is on the thin cows. Those thin cows need to receive some extra attention, and we need to limit their exposure to conditions that will increase their energy requirements. Because again, we're asking them, they've got to maintain where they're at, plus add on some extra condition. And so those are going to be cows that we need to baby along a little bit, make sure that we've got some extra energy in their rations, make sure that they are have access to areas that will provide them some protection from the elements. So if we look at cattle that are maintained in sort of ideal conditions, no mud or shade, good ventilation, and they don't get cold stress, and we kind of set that as where their energy values are going to be. If we start putting them into areas even that are outside, but have some adverse weather, we increase their energy demands. And certainly if they get out in some of that deep mud, like most of us probably are having right now, we have greatly increased her energy demands. So if we've got a place where she can get up and get some shelter and that kind of thing, those cows that are a little thin, that's going to be, anything we can do to limit her extra energy demands is going to benefit her. So I mentioned that increasing energy density of the diet for thin cows can help recover their condition, but timing of this is going to be absolutely critical. So if we look at some data here of cows that either calved being less than body condition score 5 or greater than body condition score 5, and then those cows were fed, and you can see that they did gain weight, either almost 2 pounds or 0.7 pounds per day. We can see that those cows that were under a body condition score 5, even though they got some extra nutrients, their pregnancy rate still suffered. So the best time to try and correct a body condition score issue is not that period between calving and breeding, it's that period between weaning and calving. So using higher quality forages and supplements for those cows during that mid to late gestation period will help to increase their body condition score. So what about managing the calf? And this is something that we get some questions on, and looking at what that calf is doing in that cow-calf pair and how that might influence cow body condition and scoring. So a question that we'll get is, what about creep feeding? Well, the real purpose of creep feeding is to increase calf weaning weight. And research has shown that even when we do offer creep feed to calves, they will continue to suckle. What goes down is the amount of hay and forage that they're consuming. So again, the purpose of creep feeding is to put the weight on the calves. And so ultimately, we don't see big impacts in terms of what it can do for the cow. But another potential strategy is early weaning. So early weaning is defined as weaning calves before that 6 to 7 months of age range. You can do this around 100 to 120 days of age, although I will say that every day that they can stay on that cow is probably better. I don't want to see it. There's some research where it got down to 90 days, but you are talking some pretty intensive management of those calves post weaning in that situation. But ultimately, if we pull those calves off early, if we get them weaned earlier, now the cow's energy demands really are going to go down, and we are able to start feeding her for those lower energy demands and see some improvements in her body condition score. So some times when early weaning might be considered would be, situations of severe drought, when our inputs in our feed situation might become limited. And so with that, I thank you for your attention.